"Thanks for the money, but nobody wants a janitor in the wedding pictures," my brother said with a smirk. The words hung in the air like a slap. I was still standing near the reception hall entrance, holding the envelope I had quietly handed him minutes earlier. Every dollar I'd saved from years of night shifts, scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans while the city slept. It was meant to help with the wedding, something a brother does. Behind him, the photographer was adjusting lights. Guests laughed over champagne. My brother's suit looked perfect under the warm glow of chandeliers. Then he casually slid the envelope into his jacket pocket and turned his back on me. "Pictures are for family," he added, almost as an afterthought. For a moment, all I could hear was the distant clinking of glasses and the quiet hum of the air conditioner. I nodded slowly, like the words made sense. Then I stepped outside into the cold evening air. He thought I was just the janitor who cleaned buildings. What he didn't realize was that I also owned one. The cold night air outside the reception hall felt quieter than the music inside. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring at the glow of the windows where my brother and his new wife were laughing with guests who probably assumed I had already gone home to mop some hallway somewhere. In their world, that's all I was, the janitor brother, who worked nights and stayed invisible during the day. The truth was simpler and somehow harder for people to understand. I'd been cleaning buildings since I was 19. Not because I lacked options, but because I needed stability. Our father died early, leaving debts and a small family that barely held together. While my brother chased big dreams and bigger risks, I chose steady work, night shifts, over time saving every extra dollar. Quiet jobs teach you patience. They also teach you how invisible people can become. Over the years, that invisibility became useful. People spoke freely around someone pushing a mop. Bank managers, tenants, contractors. They never noticed. The man listening while polishing the floor beneath their shoes. And while they talked, I learned. I saved. I invested carefully. My brother always believed he was the smart one, the successful one. To him, I was just the guy who cleaned the building. He never bothered to ask who owned it. Inside the hall, the music swelled and laughter rose in gentle waves. Through the tall glass windows, I could see my brother moving from table to table, shaking hands, smiling wide, the envelope I'd given him, still tucked neatly, into his jacket. He didn't look toward the door again. That wasn't new. Growing up, he had always been the one people noticed first. Louder voice, brighter plans, bigger promises. When relatives asked about us, he talked about startups and investments. When they asked about me, he would shrug and say, "He cleans buildings, night shifts." The way he said it always carried a small pause, just long enough for the room to fill in the meaning. At family dinners, the pattern repeated itself. My sister-in-law once asked, half laughing, "So do you wear those blue uniforms to work?" My brother answered before I could. "Yeah," he said, grinning. "But hey, someone's got to keep the floors shiny." The table chuckled politely. I had smiled too. Not because it was funny, but because correcting them never seemed worth the effort. People rarely ask deeper questions when they think they already understand your place. Over time, the assumptions grew comfortable for everyone, especially my brother. To him, I was predictable, safe. The quiet janitor who showed up with envelopes of help and quietly disappeared afterward. I stayed outside for a while, watching the celebration through the glass until the photographer began gathering people for the big family picture. My brother stood in the center beside his bride, one arm raised, waving relatives closer. Parents, cousins, friends, everyone squeezed together beneath the warm lights. Then someone glanced toward the entrance. For a brief second, my brother followed their gaze and saw me standing there. Our eyes met through the glass. Instead of calling me in, he simply shook his head once, a small dismissive motion, and turned back to the camera. The flash went off. In that bright white burst of light, the decision settled quietly in my mind. For years, I had believed helping family was just something you did. No questions, no expectations. I covered small debts, co-signed a loan once, and even helped with the deposit for the apartment he and his new wife were living in now. He always said he'd pay it back when things took off. They never did. But the building they lived in, that was different. 2 years earlier, I had purchased it quietly through a small holding company. Not out of revenge, just a careful investment. Standing there that night, watching him celebrate without me, I realized something simple. Some people don't respect kindness. They only respect consequences. Revenge never appealed to me when it was loud. Loud revenge burns quickly and leaves a mess behind. Quiet decisions, on the other hand, tend to last. The morning after the wedding, I woke up at the same time I always did. Late morning. after another overnight shift at one of the office towers I managed. Sunlight slipped through the blinds while I made coffee and opened my laptop at the small kitchen table. Routine first, emotions later. My property management dashboard loaded slowly, listing every unit in the building I owned. 22 apartments, rent histories, lease agreements, maintenance records. It was the kind of system most landlords used, and I kept everything documented, neat, and legal. My brother's name appeared under Unit 3B, 3 months behind on rent. I stared at the number for a moment, remembering all the times he had told people how well his business ventures were doing. I had never pushed him about the payments. Family gets patience, most tenants don't. But patience and permission aren't the same thing. I printed the formal notice template my management company used for overdue rent, standard language, nothing personal, just dates, amounts, and the legal timeline required by the lease. No anger, no threats, just paperwork. Then I placed the envelope in my bag, the same way I carried hundreds of routine notices before starting another. Quiet night shift. That evening, the hallway lights in the building flickered on one by one as the sun disappeared behind the rooftops. I walked down the third-floor corridor with the same steady pace I used every night. Keys clipped to my belt, the soft smell of cleaning solution still lingering in the air. To anyone watching, it looked like another routine shift for the janitor. Unit 3B sat halfway down the hall. Inside, I could hear muffled laughter and the clink of glasses. My brother and his new wife were probably still celebrating, surrounded by unopened wedding gifts and half-finished plans for the future they liked to talk about. I slid the envelope from my bag. No anger, no hesitation, just a quiet knock. The door opened a few seconds later. My brother stood there in sweatpants and a wrinkled dress shirt from the night before. His smile faded when he saw me. "Oh," he said. "What's up?" I simply handed him the envelope. He frowned and opened it, eyes moving across the printed notice. I watched the exact moment the words sank in. 3 months overdue. 14 days to settle the balance, or vacate the property. His head lifted slowly. "You're the landlord?" he asked. I nodded once. For the first time in his life, my brother looked at me, and didn't see a janitor. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. My brother kept staring at the notice like it might change if he read it again. Behind him, his wife stepped closer, curiosity turning quickly into confusion as she scanned the page over his shoulder. "What is that?" she asked. "Late rent notice," I said calmly. Her eyes moved from the paper to me, then back to the hallway, taking in the keys on my belt, the clipboard in my hand, the quiet certainty in my voice. Something about the scene finally clicked. "You own the building?" she asked. I nodded once. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. Within a few days, the calls started, first from my brother, awkward at first, then defensive, then suddenly respectful in a way I had never heard before. Later came messages from relatives who had attended the wedding, their tone carefully neutral, as if trying to understand how the quiet janitor they joked about had somehow become the landlord in the story. But the truth wasn't dramatic. Nothing about my life had changed. I still worked nights, I still cleaned floors sometimes, I still kept things simple. The only difference was that people had finally learned something important. Respect shouldn't depend on a job title, and neither should family. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. My brother didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. Pride has a way of muting people when reality arrives too clearly. Instead, he showed up one afternoon, with a cashier's check for the overdue rent and a stiffness in his posture I had never seen before. He handed it to me without a joke, without a smirk. Just a quiet, "Thanks for the patience." That was the first time he had ever said those words to me. Life returned to its usual rhythm after that. I still worked my night shifts, still pushed a mop through empty hallways while the city slept. Owning buildings didn't change who I was, it just meant the work I respected had built something solid over time. My brother eventually moved to another apartment across town, not because I forced him out, but because distance sometimes gives people room to rethink how they treat others. We still speak occasionally now, not as the successful brother and the janitor brother, just as two men who finally understand something simple. Some people measure worth by the suit you wear in a photograph, but real value is built quietly, long before the camera ever flashes.